The morning sun cast long shadows across the reinforced walls of Haven's Rest, humanity's final bastion against the endless tide of the undead. Dr. Calith Morven pressed her palm against the cold steel of the observation deck's railing, watching the horizon where movement never ceased. 3 years had passed since the world fell, since the virus that started as humanity's greatest medical breakthrough became its most devastating curse. Now, barely 50,000 souls remained scattered across a handful of settlements, and Haven's Rest sheltered the largest concentration of survivors with just over 8,000 people clinging to life within its walls. Calitha's breath formed small clouds in the crisp air as she studied the data tablet in her hands. The numbers told a story she wished she could rewrite. Food supplies dwindling. Ammunition reserves at critical levels. The undead masses growing larger each day as they converged on the settlement like a slow-moving hurricane of death. But it was the final entry that made her stomach clench with dread. The walls showed stress fractures that couldn't be repaired with their current resources. Still playing with those depressing statistics? The voice belonged to Commander Thorson Blackwater, whose heavy boots announced his approach long before his words did. The grizzled military veteran had lost his left eye to a zombie's claws during the evacuation of Chicago, but his remaining eye burned with a determination that had kept morale alive even in their darkest hours. Calith turned to face him, noting the fresh worry lines etched around his scarred features. The eastern wall took another hit last night. Zephyrus scouts report the Horde has swollen to nearly 2 million strong. They're not just wandering anymore, Thorson. They're organized. The commander's jaw tightened. He'd seen the reports, witnessed the impossible coordination among creatures that should have been mindless. The undead no longer shambled aimlessly. They moved with purpose, adapting their approach when they encountered obstacles, even using simple tools to breach defenses. It defied everything they thought they knew about the virus's effects on human cognitive function. Bastion's been working on something, Thorson said, his voice carefully neutral. Claims he's found patterns in the electromagnetic readings from the dead zones. Won't tell anyone what he's discovered, but he's been locked in that lab for 72 hours straight. Calith felt a spark of hope kindle in her chest. Bastion Vex was their most brilliant engineer, a man whose innovations had kept their power grid functioning and their water purification systems operational when conventional repair methods failed. If anyone could find a technological solution to their predicament, it would be him. But she also knew Bastion well enough to recognize his tendency toward dangerous experimentation when desperation took hold. The sound of running footsteps on metal grating drew their attention. Zephyra Nightwind, their chief scout, appeared at the top of the stairwell, her dark hair whipping in the wind and her chest heaving from exertion. The young woman's ability to move unseen through zombie-infested territory had saved countless lives, but the haunted look in her amber eyes spoke of horrors witnessed that no amount of training could prepare someone for. "Commander, Doctor," she gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "You need to see this. Both of you. Now." Without waiting for a response, Zephyra spun and headed back down the stairs, her urgency infectious. Calith and Thorson exchanged glances before following, their footsteps echoing through the metallic corridors of the command center. The settlement's architecture reflected its desperate construction, with shipping containers welded together and reinforced with salvaged steel plating. Functionality had trumped aesthetics when survival hung in the balance. They descended into the communications center, where Vesper Thorn sat surrounded by a maze of radio equipment and computer monitors. The soft-spoken communications specialist had maintained contact with the 7 other remaining settlements scattered across the continent, serving as the thin thread that kept humanity's fragments connected. But the expression on Vesper's pale features suggested that thread might be about to snap. "Show them," Zephyra commanded, pointing at the largest monitor. Vesper's fingers flew across the keyboard, bringing up a satellite feed that made Calitha's blood run cold. The image showed their neighboring settlement, Ironhold Station, just 200 miles to the west. Or rather, it showed what remained of it. The walls had been breached in multiple locations, and the characteristic heat signatures of human life had vanished. In their place, An endless sea of cooler blue dots marked the presence of the undead, spreading outward from the settlement's ruins like spilled ink. When? Thorson's voice was barely above a whisper. The transmission cut off 6 hours ago, Vesper replied, their voice trembling. 3,000 people, Commander. Gone. Caleth felt the weight of inevitability settling on her shoulders like a burial shroud. Ironhold Station had been their backup plan, the place they'd hoped to evacuate to if Haven's Rest fell. Now that option had vanished, leaving them truly alone against an enemy that seemed to grow stronger and more organized with each passing day. The silence stretched until Zephyra spoke again, her words carrying the weight of a death sentence. There's more. The satellite detected something else in the feed from Ironhold. The zombies, they were moving in formation. Perfect military formation. The revelation hung in the air like a toxic cloud as the 4 leaders of Haven's Rest absorbed the implications. Caleth's scientific mind raced through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Military formations required command structure, tactical thinking, and communication, cognitive functions that the virus had supposedly destroyed. Yet the evidence stared back at them from the monitor, undeniable and horrifying. "Get me Lyralii and Orin," Thorson ordered, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Emergency council meeting in 10 minutes. As Vesper reached for the communication console, Caleth was already moving toward the laboratory levels. Her instincts told her that Bastion's mysterious research might hold answers to the nightmare unfolding before them. The engineer's lab occupied a converted storage unit in the settlement's lower levels, its reinforced walls lined with salvaged equipment and jury-rigged instruments that hummed with electrical energy. She found Bastion hunched over a complex array of sensors and displays, his usually pristine appearance disheveled from days of intensive work. His dark hair stuck up at odd angles, and his clothes bore the stains of spilled coffee and solder burns. The man who had once worn expensive suits to corporate boardrooms now looked like a mad scientist from an old horror film. "Bastion," Caleth called softly, not wanting to startle him away from what might be a crucial breakthrough. He spun around, his eyes wide and bloodshot but blazing with excitement. "Caleth. Perfect timing. You need to see this. It changes everything we thought we knew about the infection." The displays showed waveform patterns that pulsed with hypnotic regularity, accompanied by electromagnetic readings that spiked in coordinated bursts. To most people, the data would have appeared as meaningless squiggles and numbers, but Caleth's background in neurobiology allowed her to recognize the basic patterns of brain activity, highly organized brain activity. "These readings are from the dead zones?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Not just readings," Bastion said, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Communications. The undead are communicating with each other through electromagnetic pulses generated by the virus's interaction with neural tissue. They're not just organized, Caleth. They're networked." The implications hit her like a physical blow. If the zombies could share information instantaneously across vast distances, it explained their increasingly sophisticated behavior. Every failure, every successful human tactic, every weakness discovered became immediately known to the entire collective. Humanity wasn't just fighting individual monsters anymore, they were facing a hive mind that learned from every encounter. "There's more," Bastion continued, pulling up another display. "The signal strength has been increasing exponentially. As more humans die and join their ranks, the network becomes more powerful. But here's the really terrifying part, the signals aren't random. They show clear hierarchical patterns. There are commanders. Alpha nodes that direct the others." Caleth felt her legs weaken as the full scope of their situation became clear. "How long before they reach us?" "Based on movement patterns and the signal coordination I've detected, approximately 18 hours. But Caleth, there's something else. The electromagnetic signature from their main force, it's unlike anything I've recorded before. The signal strength suggests a central intelligence that dwarfs anything we've encountered." A sharp knock on the lab door interrupted their discussion. Zephyra's voice carried through the metal barrier, urgent and strained. "Doctor, Commander needs you in the conference room immediately. We have a situation." The conference room was a converted classroom that had once served the settlement's children, back when they'd been optimistic enough to plan for the future. Now it housed the grim business of survival planning. Lyralii Ashworth, their chief medical officer, sat beside Orrin Galehart, the settlement's strategic coordinator. Both wore expressions that spoke of bad news delivered and worse news anticipated. Lyralii spoke first, her typically calm demeanor cracked by exhaustion and stress. "We've lost contact with New Meridian and Coastal Haven. Radio silence for the past 4 hours. Given what happened to Ironhold Station. They're gone," Orrin finished, his analytical mind cutting straight to the inevitable conclusion. The elderly strategist had planned corporate acquisitions in his former life, but the apocalypse had transformed his skills into something more vital, predicting the movements of the dead and the desperation of the living. Thorson leaned forward, his remaining eye fixed on each face around the table. "That leaves us, Northern Watch, and Skyline Settlement. 3 bastions out of 8. The enemy has eliminated 5 major strongholds in less than 72 hours. Caleth shared Bastion's discoveries, watching the color drain from her colleagues' faces as the true nature of their enemy became clear. The silence that followed her explanation was broken only by the distant hum of generators and the ever-present sound of wind through the settlement's metal structures. "So we're not just facing zombies," Lyralii said slowly. "We're facing a collective intelligence that's been learning from every encounter, growing stronger with every settlement it consumes. And it's coming for us next," Zephyra added, her scout's instincts already calculating escape routes and defensive positions. 18 hours isn't enough time to evacuate 8,000 people, especially not with that horde bearing down on us." Orrin tapped his fingers against the table's surface, a habit that emerged when his mind worked through complex problems. "We need to think beyond conventional defense. If they're truly networked, then disrupting their communication might level the playing field." Bastion's eyes lit up with dangerous possibility. "I might have something. It's theoretical, completely untested, and the risks." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "The risks are considerable. But if we're already facing extinction, perhaps desperate measures are justified." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications of his words. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, coating the settlement's walls in white that would soon be stained red. The weight of Bastion's unspoken proposition settled over the room like a funeral shroud. Caleth studied the engineer's face, recognizing the particular intensity that accompanied his most ambitious, and dangerous, innovations. She'd seen that expression when he'd proposed using nuclear batteries to power their defense grid, and again when he'd suggested channeling the settlement's entire electrical output to create an electromagnetic barrier around their walls. "Explain your theory," Thorson commanded, though his tone suggested he already dreaded the answer. Bastion stood and began pacing, his movements sharp and agitated. "The electromagnetic network that connects the undead operates on specific frequencies. If we could generate a powerful enough signal on those same frequencies, we might be able to disrupt their coordination, essentially jamming their hive mind." "That doesn't sound particularly dangerous," Lyralii said, though her medical training made her naturally suspicious of solutions that seemed too simple. "The signal would need to be immensely powerful," Bastion continued, his voice growing quieter. "We'd have to channel every ounce of electrical energy in the settlement, power grid, backup generators, even the emergency reserves, into a single massive pulse. The feedback could destroy our entire electrical infrastructure." Orrin leaned back in his chair, his strategic mind immediately grasping the implications. "Without power, we lose water purification, heating, refrigeration, communications. We'd be living in medieval conditions while surrounded by millions of zombies." "Assuming the pulse doesn't kill us outright," Zephyra added grimly. "That much electromagnetic energy released in a confined space, what would it do to human neural tissue?" Bastion's silence answered her question more effectively than words could have. The risk was total. Success might save them, but failure would certainly doom them. Even success carried the possibility of severe brain damage or death for anyone within the settlement during the pulse. Caleth felt the familiar sensation of standing at a crossroads between impossible choices, the kind of moment that had defined humanity's struggle since the outbreak began. Every decision carried the weight of thousands of lives, and every mistake could mean the extinction of their small pocket of civilization. "How long would you need to prepare?" she asked. 6 hours, minimum. The modifications to our power systems are extensive, and I'd need to recalibrate every transmitter in the settlement to achieve the proper frequency resonance. Bastion's hands moved as he spoke, sketching invisible diagrams in the air. But that assumes everything works perfectly on the first attempt. In reality, we might get one chance before the Horde arrives, Thorson finished. And if it fails, we'll be defenseless and powerless when they breach our walls. A soft knock interrupted their discussion. The door opened to reveal Marcus Thorne, Vesper's teenage brother, whose youth had made him one of the few people in the settlement who still believed in hope. The boy's eyes were wide with excitement, and he clutched a radio handset in his trembling hands. "Commander," he gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "We're receiving a transmission from someone claiming to be Dr. Elena Vasquez." The name sent a shock through everyone in the room. Dr. Vasquez had been the lead researcher on Project Renaissance, the military bioweapon program that had accidentally created the zombie virus. She'd been presumed dead when the research facility was overrun during the first days of the outbreak. "Put her through," Thorson ordered, his voice tense with barely controlled emotion. Marcus fumbled with the radio controls, and after a moment of static, a woman's voice filled the room. The transmission was weak and plagued with interference, but the words were clear enough to understand. "Haven's Rest, this is Dr. Elena Vasquez broadcasting from Blackwater Research Station. I have critical information about the Undead collective consciousness and a possible countermeasure. The situation is more desperate than you know. The Alpha intelligence is not just coordinating the Horde, it's evolving, learning to overcome every defensive measure you've employed. Traditional electromagnetic jamming won't work. The network has developed resistance protocols." Caleth grabbed the handset from Marcus. "Dr. Vasquez, this is Dr. Caleth Morvan. How do you know about our jamming plans?" Static filled the radio for several long seconds before Vasquez's voice returned, weaker than before. "Because I helped design the neural networking capabilities. The virus was meant to create a battlefield communication system for enhanced soldiers. Instead, it created something far more sophisticated. Listen carefully. The only way to disrupt the network permanently is to target the Prime Alpha node. The original host consciousness that serves as the system's core processor." "What original host?" Thorson demanded, leaning toward the radio. "Patient 0. The first infected subject from our research trials. He's still alive, still conscious, serving as the command nexus for the entire collective. Destroy him, and the network collapses. But he's protected by the largest concentration of undead on the continent. The main Horde isn't heading toward you randomly, it's being directed by someone who remembers human tactics and is learning to counter them." The transmission began to fade, Vasquez's voice becoming increasingly distorted. "Blackwater Station, coordinates, underground facility, the cure is here, but I can't, signal breaking up, they've found me." The radio fell silent except for the hiss of static. Marcus frantically adjusted the controls, trying to re-establish contact, but the transmission was gone. The room erupted in urgent conversation as everyone spoke at once, but Caleth barely heard them. Her mind was reeling from the implications of Vasquez's revelation. Patient 0 wasn't just another zombie, he was a conscious, intelligent entity controlling an army of millions. The Horde approaching Haven's Rest wasn't a mindless swarm but a carefully orchestrated attack commanded by someone who understood human psychology and military strategy. The electromagnetic pulse might disrupt local communication temporarily, but it wouldn't address the fundamental problem. They needed to find Blackwater Research Station and locate Patient Zero. But with 18 hours until the Horde arrived and no way to evacuate their population, the choice seemed impossible. Stay and fight with electromagnetic weapons that might only provide temporary relief, or abandon 8,000 people to search for a cure that might not exist. As the debate raged around her, Caliph noticed that Zephyra had remained silent, her expression thoughtful and distant. The scout's tactical mind was clearly working through possibilities that the others hadn't considered. "What if we split our resources?" Zephyra said suddenly, her voice cutting through the arguments. "A small team goes after Patient Zero while the settlement prepares for siege. If the strike team succeeds, the Horde loses coordination at the critical moment. If they fail..." She paused, meeting each person's eyes in turn. "If they fail, at least some of humanity's knowledge and capabilities survive to fight another day." The plan that emerged from the next hour of intense discussion would have been dismissed as suicidal under normal circumstances. But as Oren repeatedly pointed out, normal circumstances had ended the day the first zombie rose from a military laboratory table. Now they faced choices that defied conventional wisdom and demanded unprecedented courage. The strike team would consist of 5 volunteers, Caliph for her medical and scientific expertise, Zephyra for her unmatched scouting abilities, Bastion for his technical knowledge, and 2 others yet to be selected. They would depart immediately, racing across zombie-infested territory to reach Blackwater Research Station before the main Horde converged on Haven's Rest. Meanwhile, Thorson would lead the settlement's defenses, implementing both conventional barriers and Bastion's electromagnetic pulse as a backup measure. "The timing has to be perfect," Oren explained, his fingers tracing routes on a salvaged road atlas. "If the strike team can locate and eliminate Patient Zero during the final assault on our walls, the loss of coordination might cause enough confusion to break the attack." Lyralii studied medical files on her tablet, preparing equipment and medications for the dangerous journey ahead. Blackwater Station is approximately 400 miles northeast. Even pushing hard, it's a minimum 3-day journey through some of the most dangerous territory on the continent. 3 days we don't have, Thorson growled, his scarred face reflecting the impossible mathematics of their situation. Bastion looked up from his calculations, his eyes bright with inspiration. "What if we don't travel by road? I've been monitoring radio frequencies from the old military installations. Wright-Patterson Air Base had several aircraft in maintenance when the outbreak began. If we can reach the base and find a functioning helicopter." "That's a massive assumption," Zephyra pointed out. "The base has been dark for 3 years. Even if aircraft remain, the fuel would have degraded, the batteries would be dead, and that's assuming the undead haven't overrun the entire facility." Caliph felt a spark of memory from her former life as a research scientist. "I worked with military medical teams during the early pandemic responses. Wright-Patterson has underground bunkers designed to withstand biological contamination. The aircraft maintenance bays were connected to those bunkers. If any part of the base survived, it would be there." The debate continued for precious minutes until Vesper's voice crackled over the intercom system. "Commander, we're detecting massive electromagnetic signatures from the approaching Horde. Whatever they're doing, it's generating power readings unlike anything we've recorded." Everyone rushed back to the communications center, where Vesper had multiple screens displaying real-time satellite feeds and electromagnetic readings. The approaching zombie horde had formed into distinct tactical formations, but it was the energy readings that made Calipha's blood run cold. The undead weren't just communicating, they were generating coordinated electrical fields that pulsed in perfect synchronization. "They're creating their own electromagnetic barriers," Bastion whispered, his face pale with the implications. "They're learning to defend against our jamming techniques." "How is that possible?" Lyralii demanded. "The virus must be evolving," Caliph replied, her scientific mind racing through the possibilities. "Patient Zero has had 3 years to experiment with the network's capabilities. He's been preparing for exactly this kind of confrontation. Thorson slammed his fist against the nearest wall, the sound echoing through the cramped space. Then we're out of time for half measures. The strike team leaves within the hour. The rest of us prepare for the worst siege in human history. The selection of the final 2 team members proved surprisingly swift. Lyralii volunteered immediately, arguing that medical expertise would be crucial for any mission involving biological weapons and patient treatment. The final spot went to Dante Ashworth, a former Air Force pilot whose knowledge of military aircraft and combat flying made him invaluable for the proposed helicopter mission. As the team gathered their equipment, Caleth found herself standing once again on the observation deck, watching the distant horizon where death approached with mechanical precision. The snow had intensified, creating a white veil that softened the harsh angles of their fortress city. In better times, it might have been beautiful. Second thoughts? Thorson's voice carried a gentle understanding that seemed incongruous with his battle-scarred appearance. About the mission? No. About leaving 8,000 people to face that horde while we chase what might be a fool's hope? Caleth turned to meet his gaze. Constantly. The commander nodded slowly. I've been a soldier for 23 years. Fought in wars where the objectives were clear and the enemy was human. This is different. We're not just fighting for territory or ideology, we're fighting for the right of our species to continue existing. What if we're wrong about Patient Zero? What if destroying him doesn't collapse the network? Then we die knowing we tried everything possible. Thorson's hand briefly touched her shoulder, a gesture of comfort between 2 people who had shared too many impossible decisions. But I've seen the data Bastion collected. The electromagnetic patterns all trace back to a central source. Your theory about the original host serving as a nexus is the only explanation that fits the evidence. Below them, the strike team's vehicle rumbled to life, a heavily armored truck that Bastion had reinforced with electromagnetic shielding and additional fuel tanks. The engineer himself emerged from beneath the vehicle, his hands black with grease and his expression grimly satisfied. The modifications are complete, he announced. We have enough fuel for 800 miles, assuming we don't encounter major obstacles. The electromagnetic shielding should protect us from their jamming fields, at least temporarily. Zephyra appeared carrying a pack filled with survival gear and weapons, her movements efficient and purposeful. Route is planned. We follow Highway 78 north for 200 miles, then cut cross-country to avoid the major dead zones. If we maintain speed and don't stop except for fuel, we can reach Wright-Patterson by tomorrow evening. And if the base is overrun? Lyralii asked, checking her medical supplies one final time. Then we continue on foot, Dante replied, his pilot's training evident in the calm confidence of his voice. But I've studied the base layout. The underground sections were designed to be completely self-contained. Even if the surface is compromised, we might find what we need below ground. As the team made their final preparations, Vesper's voice echoed from the communication center, carrying news that sent chills through everyone who heard it. The Horde has stopped advancing. They're approximately 12 miles from our walls, but they've halted their approach and they're digging. Creating earthworks and defensive positions. The implications were staggering. The Undead weren't just planning an assault, they were preparing for a siege. Patient Zero understood that Haven's Rest would not fall easily, so he was settling in for a prolonged battle of attrition. The strike team's window of opportunity was closing faster than anyone had anticipated. We leave now, Caleth announced, her voice carrying the weight of command decision. Every minute we delay gives them more time to prepare. As the team climbed into their armored vehicle, the last sounds they heard from Haven's Rest were the mechanical noises of defensive preparations and the distant rumble of millions of undead voices carried on the winter wind. The armored truck cut through the abandoned landscape like a metal beast fleeing the apocalypse, its reinforced frame shuddering with each impact against debris scattered across the highway. 3 hours into their journey, the strike team had witnessed the true scope of civilization's collapse. Abandoned vehicles stretched for miles in both directions, creating steel graveyards where desperate refugees had died trying to escape the initial outbreak. Now those same cars served as hiding places for scattered groups of undead, their mindless occupants stirring to life as the truck's engine noise announced the presence of living humans. Dante Ashworth gripped the steering wheel with practiced intensity, his pilot's training evident in the way he navigated obstacles at dangerous speeds. The former Air Force captain had learned to fly through enemy fire over hostile territories, and those skills translated surprisingly well to driving through zombie-infested wastelands. His eyes constantly scanned the road ahead, calculating trajectories and escape routes with the precision of someone accustomed to life-or-death decisions made in split seconds. Movement on the left, Zephyra called from her position at the gun turret bastion had welded to the truck's roof. The scout's enhanced vision had spotted a group of zombies emerging from an overturned school bus, their rotting forms shambling toward the road with mechanical determination. The vehicle's electromagnetic shielding hummed softly as it deflected the undead's coordination signals, creating a localized dead zone that disrupted their hive-mind connection. The zombies who entered this field immediately became confused and disoriented, their carefully coordinated movements dissolving into the aimless wandering that had characterized the early days of the outbreak. "The shielding is working better than expected," Bastion reported from his position at the electronic monitoring station he'd constructed in the truck's cargo area. "But the power drain is significant. We'll need to reduce speed or risk depleting our auxiliary batteries before we reach Wright-Patterson." Caleth studied the landscape through reinforced windows, noting the subtle changes that marked their progress into the Dead Lands. The vegetation had taken on an unnatural appearance, with trees bearing leaves that seemed too vibrant and grass that grew in patterns that defied natural randomness. The virus had affected more than just human physiology, it was altering the entire ecosystem in ways that science had yet to understand. There, Lyralii pointed toward a distant structure that rose above the surrounding forest canopy. "The radio tower from Meridian Broadcasting. We're making better time than projected." The medical officer had spent the journey reviewing everything known about the original virus research, particularly the classified files that Caleth had obtained during her work with military medical teams. The information painted a disturbing picture of Project Renaissance, a weapons program designed to create enhanced soldiers capable of operating as a networked fighting force. According to these files, Patient Zero was a volunteer named Marcus Hendricks, Lyralii continued, reading from her tablet. Former Marine Sergeant, decorated veteran of 3 combat tours. He volunteered for the enhancement program after losing his entire squad to an IED in Afghanistan. What kind of enhancements were they attempting? Dante asked, swerving around a cluster of abandoned vehicles. Increased strength, enhanced healing, and most importantly, direct neural networking with other enhanced soldiers. The idea was to create small units that could share information instantaneously, coordinate complex maneuvers without radio communication, and maintain unit cohesion even when separated by large distances. Bastion looked up from his instruments, his expression troubled. "The electromagnetic patterns I've detected suggest the networking capability far exceeded their original specifications. If Hendricks retained his human consciousness while gaining control over the entire collective, he's essentially become a military commander with an army of millions." The truck crested a hill, revealing a vista that made everyone fall silent. The valley below had once contained the small city of Riverside, population 30,000. Now it served as a massive staging ground for the undead. Hundreds of thousands of zombies moved through the abandoned streets in perfect formation, creating supply lines and defensive positions with the efficiency of a professional army. At the center of the activity, several large structures had been cleared and fortified, suggesting the establishment of command and control centers. "They're not just organizing," Zephyra observed, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're building infrastructure. Look at those roadblocks, they're designed to channel living humans into kill zones." "Drive faster," Caleth ordered, a chill running down her spine as she realized the full implications of what they were witnessing. The undead weren't just planning to destroy the remaining human settlements, they were preparing for long-term occupation and control of the continent. As they descended into the valley, taking a route that skirted the edges of Riverside. The truck's electromagnetic shielding began fluctuating under the strain of deflecting signals from so many networked minds. Bastion worked frantically with his controls, trying to maintain their protective bubble while conserving power for the journey ahead. "Shielding at 60%, he announced. "We're taking some kind of focused electromagnetic attack. They know we're here and they're trying to break through our defenses." The truck suddenly lurched as something massive struck its rear bumper. Dante fought to maintain control as he checked the mirrors, revealing a sight that defied belief. A group of zombies had formed a human pyramid, with the topmost figures leaping from moving vehicles onto the truck's cargo area. But these weren't the mindless attacks they'd grown accustomed to. This was a coordinated assault using tactical precision. "They're adapting to our shielding," Zephyra called down from the turret, firing controlled bursts at the attacking zombies. "The ones outside our electromagnetic field are directing the ones inside it." Lyralii grabbed her medical kit and moved toward the rear of the truck, where something was scratching against the reinforced doors. "We need to break contact and get out of this valley. If they coordinate a roadblock ahead of us, we'll be trapped." The truck's engine roared as Dante pushed it to maximum speed, racing through a landscape that had become an elaborate trap. Behind them, the zombie formations in Riverside began moving with new purpose, flowing toward their escape route like a dark tide responding to invisible commands. As they finally cleared the valley and entered the comparative safety of open highway, Caleth realized that their mission had already changed in fundamental ways. They weren't just racing to reach Patient Zero before the assault on Haven's Rest, they were fleeing from an enemy that had transformed the entire continent into a battlefield where human survival was no longer assumed. The road ahead stretched into darkness, carrying them toward Wright-Patterson Air Base and whatever answers awaited in the depths of Blackwater Research Station. But now they knew with terrible certainty that even if they succeeded in their mission, the world they were fighting to save had already been fundamentally altered by an intelligence that understood war better than any human strategist. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base materialized from the morning mist like a ghost of America's military might. The perimeter fence still stood intact in most places, though years of neglect had allowed vegetation to grow through the chain links, creating a barrier that looked more like a botanical garden than a security installation. Most importantly, the electromagnetic readings from Bastion's instruments showed minimal undead activity within the facility's boundaries. "It's too quiet," Zephyra observed as Dante brought the truck to a stop near what had once been the main gate. The scout's instincts had kept them alive through countless dangerous situations, and her unease was palpable. A facility this size should have attracted thousands of zombies over the past 3 years. Bastion studied his electromagnetic monitoring equipment, frowning at readings that didn't match his expectations. "There's definitely some kind of field emanating from the underground sections. It's not powerful enough to affect the truck systems, but it might be disrupting the Undead's navigation abilities." Caleth stepped out of the vehicle, her scientific training demanding direct observation of phenomena that couldn't be explained by current data. The air around the base felt different, cleaner somehow, with an almost electric quality that made her skin tingle. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant sound of wind through abandoned buildings. "The hangar complex is approximately 2 miles northeast," Dante said, consulting a military map from his pilot training days. "If any aircraft survived, they'll be in the hardened maintenance bays near the underground command centers." Lyralii gathered her medical supplies while keeping watch for movement among the base's numerous buildings. The structures showed obvious signs of hasty abandonment, doors left open, vehicles parked at odd angles, personal belongings scattered across walkways where people had dropped them during desperate evacuations. They drove through the empty base in eerie silence, passing facilities that had once housed thousands of military personnel and cutting-edge research projects. The absence of undead was both reassuring and deeply unsettling. Every other location they'd encountered during their journey had been teeming with zombie activity, yet Wright-Patterson seemed frozen in time from the day it was evacuated. The aircraft maintenance hangar rose before them like a cathedral dedicated to military aviation. The massive structure could easily house a dozen large aircraft, with reinforced concrete walls and blast-resistant doors that had been designed to withstand direct missile strikes. More importantly, several smaller buildings clustered around the main hangar showed signs of recent electrical activity. There, Dante pointed toward a structure that bore the unmistakable markings of a helicopter maintenance facility. If we're going to find a functioning aircraft, it'll be in there. The building's main doors had been sealed with heavy chains and military locks, but Bastion's engineering skills made short work of the security measures. As the doors swung open, they revealed a sight that brought hope for the first time in days. 3 military helicopters sat in various stages of maintenance, with tools and parts scattered around them in ways that suggested the mechanics had been interrupted during routine work. Dante moved from aircraft to aircraft with the practiced eye of someone who understood military aviation. The first helicopter had obviously been cannibalized for parts, its engine compartment empty and its rotor assembly removed. The second showed signs of significant battle damage, with bullet holes throughout its fuselage and smoke stains around the cockpit area. This one, he announced, approaching the third aircraft with growing excitement. UH-60 Black Hawk, still in complete condition. The fuel tanks are nearly full, and all the major systems appear intact. While Dante began his pre-flight inspection, Bastion worked to restore electrical power to the facility. His electromagnetic monitoring equipment had detected a functioning power grid beneath the base, suggesting that the underground command centers were still operational. Within minutes, overhead lights flickered to life, followed by the rumble of ventilation systems that had been dormant for years. The underground sections are definitely active, Bastion reported, studying readings from multiple instruments. Whatever's down there has been maintaining itself autonomously since the evacuation. Caleth felt a mixture of anticipation and dread as she contemplated what they might find in the subterranean levels. Military installations built during the Cold War era often contained facilities designed to operate independently for months or years. If Wright-Patterson's underground sections had remained sealed and operational, they might contain resources crucial to their mission. The helicopter's engines roared to life with a sound that seemed impossibly loud after days of careful stealth. Dante ran through system checks with military precision, his hands moving across controls with the confidence of hundreds of hours of flight experience. Everything appeared functional, from navigation systems to defensive countermeasures. Flight time to Blackwater Research Station is approximately 4 hours, he announced over the engine noise. We have fuel for roughly 6 hours of operation, which should give us enough reserve for reconnaissance and extraction. Lyralii secured her medical equipment while Zephyra conducted a final weapons check. The scout had equipped herself with precision rifles designed for long-range engagement, anticipating that their approach to the research facility would require eliminating sentries and guards from maximum distance. As they prepared for departure, Vesper's voice crackled through their portable radio, reporting from Haven's Rest with updates that chilled everyone who heard them. The Undead Horde had completed its siege preparations and was beginning probing attacks against the settlement's defenses. More disturbing, electromagnetic readings suggested the arrival of something the radio operator described as a mobile command center of unprecedented signal strength. Patient Zero is taking personal command of the assault, Caleth realized, her stomach clenching with the implications. He's not just directing the attack remotely, he's moved to the front lines. The helicopter lifted off from Wright-Patterson with a thunderous roar, climbing into gray skies that promised more snow before evening. As they flew northeast toward Blackwater Research Station, each member of the strike team understood that they were racing against time measured in hours rather than days. Below them, the landscape revealed the true scope of the catastrophe that had befallen civilization. Entire cities stood empty and dark, their populations either dead or transformed into components of the vast undead network. Roads had been deliberately destroyed in many places, creating barriers that would funnel any surviving humans into predetermined kill zones. But it was the sight of organized zombie formations moving across the countryside that truly demonstrated the enemy's evolution. These weren't mindless hordes shambling randomly through the wasteland, they were disciplined units executing complex maneuvers with military precision. There, Dante called over the engine noise, pointing toward a cluster of buildings barely visible through the afternoon haze. Blackwater Research Station. And it looks like we're expected. The facility was surrounded by thousands of undead arranged in defensive positions that would have impressed a career military officer. But at the center of the complex, a structure that hadn't appeared in any of their intelligence reports rose above the other buildings like a dark spire reaching toward the sky. Blackwater Research Station sprawled across several square miles of what had once been peaceful farmland, its collection of laboratories, containment facilities, and support buildings now serving as the command center for an army of the dead. From their aerial vantage point, the strike team could see the full scope of the installation's transformation during the 3 years since the outbreak began. The original research buildings remained largely intact, but new structures had been constructed around them with architectural precision that defied everything they thought they knew about zombie capabilities. Concrete barriers formed interlocking defensive lines, while elevated platforms provided commanding views of all approaches. Most disturbing of all, the undead manning these positions moved with purposeful coordination, adjusting their formations as the helicopter circled overhead. The central tower wasn't in the original facility plans, Dante observed, bringing the aircraft into a wide reconnaissance pattern. The structure rose nearly 200 feet above the surrounding buildings, its surface bristling with electromagnetic transmitters and communication arrays that pulsed with synchronized energy patterns. Bastion studied his instruments with growing alarm. The electromagnetic output from that tower is off the charts. It's generating enough signal strength to coordinate undead across multiple continents. No wonder their tactical capabilities have been improving so rapidly. Caleth focused her attention on the building complex at the tower's base, noting modifications that suggested ongoing research and development activities. Smoke rose from several chimneys, indicating active heating systems, while vehicle tracks in the surrounding area showed recent movement patterns too organized to be accidental. Someone's been conducting research down there, she realized with a chill of recognition. Patient Zero hasn't just been commanding the Horde, he's been continuing the enhancement program. The implications were staggering. If Marcus Hendricks had retained enough of his human intelligence to conduct scientific research while controlling millions of undead, then their enemy possessed capabilities that went far beyond anything they'd imagined. He wasn't just a zombie with enhanced coordination abilities, he was a military scientist with unlimited test subjects and no ethical constraints. Zephyra studied the defensive positions through high-powered binoculars, her scouts training immediately identifying the tactical challenges they faced. Approach vectors are heavily defended. They've created overlapping fields of fire that would make a ground assault nearly impossible. What about the underground sections? Lyralii asked, reviewing building schematics on her tablet. The original research facility had extensive subterranean levels designed for biological containment. Dante pointed toward an area several miles from the main complex where the landscape showed signs of recent excavation. There. Emergency exit tunnels from the underground levels. If we can access the facility from below, we might avoid the heaviest defenses. The helicopter banked toward the excavation site, revealing a scene that made everyone's blood run cold. Hundreds of undead workers were systematically excavating tunnels and chambers with mechanical precision, creating an underground network that extended for miles in every direction. The scale of the construction project suggested years of coordinated effort guided by intelligence that understood engineering principles and long-term strategic planning. "They're building an empire," Bastion whispered, his voice filled with horror at the implications. An entire civilization designed around death and decay. As they approached the landing zone, Zephyra spotted movement that sent her tactical instincts into high alert. Incoming hostiles, ground-based. They're tracking our approach vector. Several groups of undead were converging on their intended landing site, moving with the coordinated precision of military units responding to an airborne threat. But these weren't the shambling zombies they'd grown accustomed to fighting. These creatures moved with enhanced speed and agility, their movements suggesting physical capabilities that exceeded normal human parameters. Enhanced variants, Caleth realized with growing dread. Patient Zero has been improving on the original virus formula. Dante brought the helicopter down in a defensive landing pattern, touching down just long enough for the strike team to disembark before lifting off again to provide aerial support. The plan was simple in concept but terrifying in execution: infiltrate the underground facility, locate Patient Zero, and eliminate the central node that controlled the global Undead network. The reality proved far more complex than their briefings had suggested. The tunnel entrance they'd identified from aerial reconnaissance was guarded by dozens of enhanced zombies whose speed and coordination made them formidable opponents. Zephyra's precision marksmanship cleared a path to the entrance, but the sound of gunfire immediately attracted additional hostile attention. "Move fast," she ordered, reloading with practiced efficiency. "We have maybe 10 minutes before reinforcements arrive in overwhelming numbers." The underground tunnels were a maze of natural caverns and artificial excavations that had been expanded and reinforced with surprising sophistication. Emergency lighting provided illumination powered by generators that hummed with steady electrical output, while ventilation systems moved air through the complex with mechanical regularity. "This way," Caleth directed, following signs that indicated the path toward the original research laboratories. The underground sections had been designed with multiple security levels, each requiring different access credentials and biological scanners that might still be functional. They moved through corridors lined with holding cells that showed signs of recent occupancy, passing laboratories where equipment continued to operate under automated control systems. The air carried a chemical smell that suggested ongoing biological research, while computer terminals displayed data that scrolled past too quickly to read. There, Lyralii pointed toward a massive reinforced door marked with biohazard symbols and warnings in multiple languages. "Primary Containment Laboratory. If Patient Zero is anywhere in this facility, he'll be in there." The security systems protecting the laboratory had been extensively modified since the original outbreak. Instead of electronic locks and access cards, the door was secured with mechanical systems that required physical manipulation. More disturbing, the modifications showed signs of being made from the inside, suggesting that Patient Zero had deliberately isolated himself within the facility's most secure location. Bastion worked to bypass the mechanical locks while the others maintained watch for approaching enemies. The sound of footsteps echoed through the tunnels, growing closer with each passing moment. But these weren't the heavy, irregular sounds of shambling zombies, they were the precise, coordinated movements of an organized force conducting a systematic search. "Got it," Bastion announced as the massive door swung open with a pneumatic hiss. Beyond lay a laboratory that defied every expectation they'd formed about zombie capabilities. The room was filled with sophisticated equipment that operated under the control of a single figure seated at a central command console. Marcus Hendricks, Patient Zero, turned to face them with movements that retained disturbing elements of human grace despite the obvious signs of viral transformation. "Dr. Morvan," he said, his voice carrying the cultured accent of military education despite the physical changes that had altered his appearance. "I've been expecting you." Marcus Hendricks had once been a decorated Marine sergeant, a warrior whose dedication to protecting others had led him to volunteer for experimental medical procedures that promised to make him a better soldier. Now, 3 years after those experiments had gone catastrophically wrong, he sat at the center of a technological nightmare that merged human intelligence with viral networking in ways that challenged the fundamental definitions of life and death. The transformation had altered his physical appearance dramatically, but his eyes retained the sharp intelligence that had made him an effective military leader. His skin had taken on the grayish pallor characteristic of the infected, while neural implants visible beneath translucent flesh pulsed with electromagnetic energy that coordinated the thoughts and actions of millions of undead across the globe. "You've come to kill me," Hendricks continued, his voice carrying no trace of surprise or fear. "To collapse the network and restore humanity's illusion of dominance over this planet. But you don't understand what you're truly fighting against." Caleth stepped forward, her scientific training demanding answers even in the face of imminent danger. "You're Marcus Hendricks, the volunteer subject from Project Renaissance. The virus was supposed to enhance human capabilities, not create a zombie plague." "The virus did exactly what it was designed to do," Hendricks replied, standing with movements that retained military bearing despite his transformed state. It enhanced human capabilities beyond anything the researchers imagined possible. The problem was that they couldn't conceive of enhancement that transcended individual consciousness. Around them, the laboratory hummed with activity as automated systems continued experiments that had been running for months or possibly years. Computer screens displayed genetic sequences and viral modifications that represented advances in biological science that would have been considered impossible before the outbreak. "You've been continuing the research," Lyralii observed, her medical training allowing her to recognize sophisticated biological equipment despite its unfamiliar configuration. "Improving it," Hendricks corrected. The original virus created enhanced individuals with networking capabilities. But it was crude, inefficient, limited by human preconceptions about the boundaries between life and death. "I've spent 3 years perfecting a system that eliminates those limitations entirely." Bastion's electromagnetic monitoring equipment was registering power levels that defied conventional understanding. The neural implants in Hendricks' skull weren't just receiving and transmitting signals, they were generating electromagnetic fields powerful enough to coordinate consciousness across continental distances. The global network isn't just communication, Bastion realized with growing horror. You're sharing consciousness itself. Every zombie isn't just connected to the others, they're all extensions of your mind. Extensions, yes, but also contributors, Hendricks explained with something approaching professorial pride. Each infected individual brings their knowledge, skills, and memories into the collective. "I have access to the accumulated experience of every human who has joined the network. Military strategists, scientists, engineers, artists, all of their capabilities are now part of a unified intelligence that grows stronger with each new addition." Zephyra had positioned herself near the laboratory's rear exit, her tactical training demanding awareness of escape routes even during crucial conversations. But the sounds from the corridors suggested that withdrawal was no longer an option. Enhanced zombies were systematically sealing off access routes, trapping the strike team within the containment facility. "Haven's Rest is under attack," Caleth said, trying to maintain focus on their primary mission despite the revelations unfolding around them. 8,000 people are dying while we stand here talking. 8,000 people are being given the opportunity to transcend the limitations of individual existence," Hendricks replied, his tone carrying the fervor of someone who genuinely believed he was offering salvation rather than destruction. "The human experiment has failed, Dr. Morvan. Your species spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare, developing increasingly sophisticated methods of killing each other over resources and ideological differences. The network offers something better: unified purpose, shared consciousness, and an end to the conflicts that have defined human history." The philosophical debate was interrupted by Dante's voice crackling through their radio communicators. The pilot had been monitoring the situation from his aerial position, and his report carried urgent tactical information. "Strike team, be advised that massive electromagnetic activity is emanating from your location. The entire Undead network appears to be converging on Blackwater Station. Whatever you're planning to do, you need to do it now." Hendricks smiled with an expression that carried disturbing echoes of his former humanity. "The network is indeed converging. Every enhanced individual, every coordinated unit, every resource under my command is moving to protect this facility. Because you've forced me to accelerate my timeline." He gestured toward computer screens that displayed countdown timers and launch sequences. The displays showed a global map marked with locations that Caleth recognized as the remaining human settlements. Each location was targeted by what appeared to be biological weapons designed to spread an enhanced version of the zombie virus. "The second-generation enhancement will be dispersed globally within 6 hours, Hendricks announced. Unlike the original virus, this version is airborne, highly contagious, and carries genetic modifications that ensure immediate integration into the network. The remaining human populations will join us whether they choose to or not." The stakes had just escalated beyond anything they'd imagined. The strike team hadn't just come to stop an attack on Haven's Rest, they'd arrived at the moment when Patient Zero intended to complete the transformation of human civilization into something fundamentally alien. Lyralii studied the laboratory equipment with growing understanding of its purpose. You're not just spreading the virus, you're evolving it. Creating new variants that are more efficient at integration and control. Evolution is exactly the right word, Hendricks agreed. Humanity's next evolutionary step, guided by intelligence that has transcended the limitations of biological mortality. But Bastian had been studying the electromagnetic readings from his instruments, and his engineering background had revealed something that Patient Zero had not anticipated. The network has a critical vulnerability, he announced suddenly. All that consciousness sharing, all that coordinated control, it requires massive amounts of electromagnetic energy. If we could overload the central processing node. The electromagnetic pulse from Haven's Rest, Caleth realized with sudden hope. If we can coordinate it with a localized overload here at the source. Hendricks' expression shifted to one of genuine concern as he understood the implications of their discovery. The network that made him incredibly powerful also made him vulnerable to precisely the kind of electromagnetic warfare that Bastian had been developing. The final battle for human civilization was about to begin in an underground laboratory where the definitions of life, death, and consciousness had been rewritten by science gone horribly wrong. But for the first time since the outbreak began, the strike team had identified a path to victory, if they could survive long enough to implement it. The electromagnetic pulse that erupted from Blackwater Research Station 6 hours later was visible from orbit, a brilliant flash of energy that temporarily disrupted satellite communications across the northern hemisphere. In that critical moment, millions of undead around the globe suddenly stopped their coordinated movements, becoming confused and directionless as their network connection severed. The strike team's sacrifice had saved humanity, but at a cost that would haunt the survivors for generations. Caleth's final transmission, recorded just before the overload sequence began, spoke of Patient Zero's last words: "You don't understand what you're destroying. Without the network, without unity, your species will fall back into the same cycles of conflict that nearly destroyed you before." Haven's Rest survived the siege, as did 2 other settlements whose defenders had implemented electromagnetic defenses based on Bastian's research. But the world they inherited was fundamentally changed, populated by scattered zombie remnants who posed less organized but still deadly threats to rebuilding efforts. In the years that followed, historians would debate whether the strike team had saved humanity or merely postponed its evolution into something beyond current understanding. The ruins of Blackwater Research Station became a memorial to both scientific ambition and the courage of those who chose human imperfection over engineered unity. And in the depths of the facility's collapsed laboratory, among equipment that would never again pulse with the electromagnetic rhythms of a global consciousness, the last words of Dr. Caleth Morvan were discovered written on a laboratory wall: "We chose to remain human, with all the chaos and conflict that choice entails. History will judge whether we were wise or merely afraid." The world continued, scarred but free, carrying the memory of 5 people who stood against the darkness and chose individual liberty over collective perfection, even when that choice meant accepting the burden of humanity's uncertain future.